Orla, I think, as other speakers have said, the ink is hardly dry on your original piece of legislation, and we're back already with a list of amendments that will be wholly inadequate to undo the damage and the destruction that's going to be caused by your initial tax. But I think it is a forerunner, really, of the fiasco that this legislation represents, that it was badly thought out, it was rushed through, and it was part of a process that's foisting further taxation onto the shoulders of people who can ill afford it. And clearly, what the bill before us today is an attempt by government to sort of give the illusion of limiting the worst excesses of the bill, deal with the greatest inequities, exclude a few more people, and then try and dress it up as a reflection of dealing with the opposition that's grown to this tax the length and breadth of the country. Well, I have to tell you that that intention will be definitely not a chance of that being fulfilled whatsoever, because this tax is already hated and will represent, in my opinion, a turning point in terms of the attitude of ordinary people to the austerity that's been put on their shoulders, not just because they can't afford it, but because of the economic lunacy that it represents. To further attempt to take more taxation out of the pockets of people who are already stressed is not going to serve our economy any good. It's not going to represent a stimulus. It will, in fact, exacerbate the problems that are already there. And one of the things that really gets people's goat is the incredible contrast that this government is using in its treatment of ordinary people and its treatment of wealthy people in our society, because all of the statistics show that those at the top of society have benefited over these difficult number of years, yet middle and lower income families have been absolutely decimated. And this is part of that same process. Probably the most draconian piece of legislation ever put forward is being put forward on homeowners, and meanwhile corporations get away with very light touch situation. The points have already been made in previous answers that you gave. The effective rate of taxation on corporations is about half of the rate that they're levied, an amount which is one of the lowest in Europe in any case. And to meet the deficit and to continue to have us shackled to the debts of private banks and problems that we were never associated with, you've come up with a home tax. Now, I'm not going to repeat the points made by others, but the dogs on the streets know a home is not an asset, it's not a source of wealth. In many instances, it's the biggest headache that people have. And the idea of putting another tax on it, to be honest, is really not the brightest. I suppose I've been fortunate in having the opportunity to go to many meetings around the country on this issue, and I'd echo the points made by other deputies that this is a point of huge concern for people. And one of the most common points you'll hear from older citizens, who tend to be to the forefront actually of a lot of those meetings, is that they spent their whole life putting a roof over their head, providing for their families, and that they would rather do time than see a scenario where they'd be taxed for the right to live in that home, or to have it not been able to be handed over to their children and their grandchildren in the future. I think, just to deal with a number of the amendments that you're proposing in terms of the bill, you know, okay, what you seek to do is lessen the valuation of local authority houses, when in actual fact the call and the amendments that will be posed to you next week is that those properties should be excluded. And if you like, you've sort of exposed the lie yourselves that this has anything to do with local services by levying council properties with that amount of money, because we know that they don't have the money to pay for it. They'll seek to pass it on to their tenants, and even at the lower amount, that won't negate the difficulty in this, and you're only doing it for the first 3 years in any case. So obviously, once they're included in the bill, the intention will be to increase that in the future, which will only exacerbate the problems for local authorities, and particularly exacerbate the problems for their tenants, all of whom are being exposed to excess and increasing rent at the moment. We don't have time to maybe develop all the issues. Obviously, we'll do it next week, but I just wanted to spend some time on the pyrite exemption, because I think this is something, Minister, that if you look at it, you might consider changing before Tuesday. We'll have a long debate then, but why don't you look at this beforehand? When the government lauded the fact that it prepared a pyrite panel, that we had submissions and much involvement. The resounding conclusion of the pyrite panel was that homes which had pyrite should be exempted from the property tax. The Minister for the Environment said that. You said you'd take account of it. What you're doing in this is an illusion. It is not taking account and recognising the difficulty that homeowners with pyrite have. This exemption does not provide that. So if you're genuine in your intention to protect homes with pyrite, then I think you'll heed the call and agree with their amendments on that. You did promise something in that regard. The reality is you're talking about allowing the Minister for the Environment to draft guidelines which will deal with homes which have a significant amount of pyrite damage. Now, the problem is who measures that and who pays for that, and it puts the liability back on the homeowner. There are many instances where homes have tested positive for pyrite, but actually display very little damage at the present time. That damage can appear over time. We have a scenario where impacting on adjoining houses and works done on an adjoining property can have an impact on the house beside it. What is the story? Your guidelines are saying that you've got to refer to the new NSAI standard, but many homeowners have already got tests done which show they've significant amounts of pyritic heave. Are they going to get an exemption based on the tests that they've already paid for? They should. And all of these points, I suppose, pinpoint how the onus has been put back on the homeowner. It's completely unnecessary to do that.
The Deputy has 1 minute remaining.
Simple amendment which includes estates with pyrite as unfinished estates and therefore as of right exempt is the only fair way to do this, because it doesn't matter if your house hasn't displayed signs of damage at the moment. If you're in an estate which has pyrite which has not yet been remediated, then your property is valueless, and the only way of really dealing with that is excluding the estates. And we have given you the simplest way of doing that by allowing the Minister, in the list which he has to revise anyway, include all of those estates. And if you factor in the amount of revenue that will be forfeited from this, it's actually, to be honest, quite negligible in the overall scale of things. So we can extend the debate next week, but I think that's one that you could certainly concede on. Last point I'll make is that you often hear at meetings people say, I don't know how much the Irish can take. Why aren't we more like the Greeks? Why aren't we more like the French? To me, if you succeed in implementing the draconian legislation that you've put on the statute books and attempt to put the state's paw into the pay packets and the social welfare packets of homeowners, that is actually when you'll really see a start of Irish people becoming more like the Greeks and the French, because they simply will not be able to take it anymore.
Thank you, Deputy.